But how do you prefer to learn and sort of understand the financial markets? Do you prefer to have sort of time to do deep work, to sit still, to read a lot of papers, to do research, or do you prefer to interact with a lot of other smart people to bounce off ideas, etc.?
I tend to think that I learn the most by talking to clever investment professionals as much as possible. So I try to have at least a couple of hundred client meetings a year, which is quite a lot. And usually you get a good sense of the big drivers of financial markets when you talk to a lot of investment professionals during the week, for example. You gather a lot of information on how various topics are perceived by investment professionals, and you gather a lot of information on the actual positioning in markets. For example, are people upbeat about the expectations, or are people downbeat? That's really much easier to figure that out when you talk to a lot of people actually taking the investment decisions. But of course, if I want to become a subject matter expert within a niche, and I think that's really a key thing to focus on, how to be that, then you need to set time aside to figure something out that no one else is able to. Um, I tend to think that if something is very straightforward to understand, then there is absolutely no chance of you having an edge on that topic, since it is fairly easy understandable for everyone. While if you dig into a topic for financial markets that is much more incomprehensible, then there is actually a possibility of you gaining a knowledge that could get you an edge on financial markets. So that's always something to bear in mind when you study financial markets, in particular when you do it professionally, that you need to look for niches, because uh, the markets that are the most covered, they are very tricky to get an edge on.
I mean, that's a super interesting insight. And talking about one of those topics, I mean, what got you so interested in foreign exchanges in the first place?
it's I think that I consider foreign exchange more based on fundamentals than other asset classes. It may be a bit of a bold statement, but it's there's a very clear line of events from politics to central banks to foreign exchange, and you can see the reaction immediately. Um, so it gives you a chance to talk about right about everything when you look at foreign exchange markets. That's also intriguing. Uh, it's probably the market that is driven by the biggest pamphlet of variables, while equity markets, and also to a certain extent fixed income markets, they are a bit more univariate in terms of which variables actually drive the price action. So the foreign exchange market is also the market where you can come up with the most bizarre investment ideas. And given that I tend to have a bit of a weird brain, then I kind of like that.
But how early did you get interested in foreign exchange? Was it pretty early as well?
Yeah, I actually think so. I mean, already in the ninth grade, I wrote about the pros and cons of having a fixed exchange rate regime. Um, so it was early, and I figured out that a lot of the smart hedge funds in the world, they exploited the foreign exchange market. In a sense, it's pretty interesting if you're actually able to create persisting returns in FX, since it is a zero-sum game, right? There's always a winner and a loser, in the sense in an FX market, and I find that very intellectually stimulating. That if you manage to create a persistent return, then you have something really smart going on for you.
Definitely. I wanted to try to start sort of from the first principle and talking a bit about currency. So, in your mind, is there what characterizes typically a strong currency in your mind?
Well, first of all, if you want to find a strong currency, you need to look at the fundamentals of it being a reserve currency in various central banks across the globe. I think the reason why the dollar is so strong right now in a historical perspective is that it's still the reserve currency number one worldwide. And what's needed to become a strong reserve currency? Well, you need a strong and liquid bond market that you can invest in. That's very important. Then you need to be a an exchange between people. So if you look at the dollar, it's used for exchange. Um, it's used for exchange in commodities. It's used for exchange in various financial instruments, and that's why it holds such value compared to other currencies. So those are sort of the very fundamental and long-term structural trends to watch for currencies, whether they hold these characteristics, whether they are obvious choices in FX reserve for a central bank. If you look at it more tactically, then it obviously matters for a currency whether the underlying central bank is hiking interest rates or the opposite. So there's a lot of analysis on central banks in my everyday life, given that they are such an instrumental driver of the actual exchange rate development on a more short-term horizon. So those are sort of the key characteristics I'm watching out for. Where's the central bank headed? And on a structural basis, is this a currency that is used for exchange of goods or assets? And is it a currency that could be an increasing part of FX reserves globally going forward?
How does that argument look on the other side if you're looking for very weak currencies? Do you flip the argument on the other side, or are there other variables to consider?
Yeah, well, you would certainly flip the argument on the other side, but there is also one variable that is absolutely instrumental in terms of pointing out weaknesses in currencies, and that's predictability. And by predictability, I mostly refer to political stability. Uh, Worst case example right now is the Turkish lira. You have a central bank that is 100% without independence. Every time they take a decision that Recep Erdogan doesn't like, then he lays off the president of the central bank. He's done so, I think it's 4 or 5 times within the last year. And every time the market reaction is super clear. The market simply dislikes the Turkish lira as a result of this. At some point, I guess the market can end up educating Erdogan on this, but he hasn't reached that conclusion yet. So that's one focal point to watch out for: political stability and independence of the local central bank, focal points for currency.